Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight I'm going to be talking about maps. Now, you've probably heard me mention maps before in previous videos, and I have a passion for maps. There's three things that I really like, military history, for example. It's a big passion of mine. That also includes archaeology, battlefield archaeology specifically. There's also maps. That's a really big one for me as well. And local history of Worcester, the city that I'm from, and my family has been from since at least the 1840s, 1830s, around about that mark, as far as I'm aware at the moment. I'm still researching that, and that could be a video in the future. But I like maps, and it's interesting when you start looking at maps in great detail, you can learn a lot from them. Now, I've got some examples to show you, and then I'm going to concentrate on Worcester, which is why this video is going to specifically get slotted into the playlist for Worcester history, or the history of Worcester, local history. Now, I would advise you, first of all, to have a look eventually when we can go outside and shop again in charity shops and antique shops, because obviously the best source for maps, old maps, are shops where people no longer feel the need to keep old maps. They want more up-to-date maps. So I've got one here. This would have cost originally 5 shilling, which is a lot of money, I must say. And it's a land use map, and it's just one of many maps that I've got. I collect most things of Worcester, and that includes postcards, books, and even maps. And this is an absolutely fantastic map. It covers Worcester and the surrounding area. I won't open it fully because it's very difficult to open without it tearing anymore, but each area is color coded dependent on what that ground is used for example, agriculture, woodland, and that sort of thing. And maps are absolutely fantastic. So a bit of advice is, when we can go out, try and find some old maps and look at them. It's worth having a look. In one of the activities we often do with school groups, for example, is we get a number of maps and we get children to sit down and find one specific place, maybe a wood, a lane, a village, maybe even their school, and then look at maps before and after, and for example see when their school is built, or when a woodland was knocked down, or when a woodland was first cultivated, when the trees were first planted, for example. So maps tell you a lot. It's also worth having a close look at maps to look at names. For example, some areas place names change for one reason or another. Maybe it had one use, and then when that use finished, it changed roles, so the area was changed. And you'll also see little indicators on a lot of maps as well, especially Ordnance Survey, because they often mark things like Mottin Bailey or Manor House, and it's often wrote in italics. And to be fair, even on a modern Ordnance Survey map, you will see that on there. You will also see things like earthworks, and if you go online and go on Google and look at Google Maps, or even Google aerial photographs, you can often overlay the two, and they're quite worth having a look at because they will show archaeological features, for example. This is what archaeologists do prior to digging. Obviously, it's less invasive than actually putting in a test pit and digging into the ground. So as I said, and as I keep saying, have a look for some old maps. Have a look at them. They're really worth having a look at. Other than that, have a look at books. There are many books that have maps in. And for example, this book, which is one of my favourite books, I think I've mentioned it before, is Medieval Worcester, an archaeological framework. It's very old. My copy is pretty much falling apart. I don't want to hold it up and let go of the bottom because all the pages will come out. But it's a fantastic book of some of the finds, for example, that have been found in Worcester over the years. There's a huge amount of documentation and research in here, but one of my favourites have to be the maps, and there are lots and lots of maps in here. They're all based on archaeology, so obviously using existing maps, geological maps, and also these archaeological maps, we can see how Worcester has changed over the years. And famously, when it comes to building cities, villages, towns, settlements, we often make use of the environment, basically. So you will usually find a water source, you will usually find high ground, And if you think of Worcester, it's built on the mightiest river, the longest river in England, which is the River Severn. And you've also got the fact that Worcester technically grew from the site of Worcester Cathedral, so the high ground. So it's quite interesting to look at the environment along with maps, and like I said, original maps or maps that are drawn in good books like these archaeological studies. There are also a lot of maps out there that have been replicated, replica maps of older maps. For example, the most famous, you can pick up these, which are replicas of the speed maps, and these are of the county. In each corner you will also have a city map, as you can see just in the corner there, so they are worth having a look at. And like I said, they're the closest you'll get to an original map if you're not looking through maps in books, for example. And they're really worth having a look at because you can see how river systems, hills, woods are key things on these maps, including things like crossroads. And obviously when you look at, for example, the Civil War, which broke out not too long after the speed maps were done, because remember, speed maps are 1610, you will notice how most skirmishes and battles take place on bridging points and crossroads and main roads and things like that. But I've also got some old replicas of old Ordnance Survey maps. Now, these came out, I think, about the early 1990s, where they started to produce a lot of old Ordnance Survey maps, and these are really good. This is Worcester Northwest, and as you can see, it says 1902, and they're very good because if you live in Worcester, or if you're researching family history, you can actually find locations of businesses from these, or have a look at areas which are literally no more. You can look up things like Bowling Green Terrace, for example, where I had relations living, and that's now part of City Wars Road. And like I said, we often get these out with children, lie them all out with the different dates on, and they can see how an area changes over time. So if you can't get an original map and you can't get any good maps in books, for example, do look out for replica maps like the speed maps and like the Ordnance Survey. Ordnance Survey also produced these some time ago, and they're really worth getting hold of. They are still available as far as I'm aware, and they did a whole series of these. This is the old series, and this is 1828 1832, and it's basically of the Worcester and the Malverns. And if you do a lot of walking on Ordnance Survey maps, Worcester in the Malverns is sheet 150. So it's basically the sheet of Ordnance Survey maps of today, but of a specific age period. And these are 1 to 50,000. And you get often two maps in one. Sometimes you have one map on one side, one map on the other. And I'll only open a little bit, but you can see how they are exact replicas of the original Ordnance Survey maps from that date. And like I said, you can look up earthworks, you can look at the names of some fields and that sort of thing. So they are really worth having a look at. As I said, I love maps. Now, when you look at the environment and you look at streets, road names, or why streets are straight, why streets have got a certain curve in them and that, you can actually put down a timeline as such. And one of the things that I use when I do walking tours of Worcester is this map. Now, this is a map that you can obtain from the Tourist Information Centre on the High Street. Now, the type that you will get is not laminated, and it is definitely not drawn on. I've personally drawn on it, so if you can ignore that for the moment, what that is a normal standard tourism map of the city of Worcester. So it basically helps tourists get around. But what I've done, because when we do the guided tours, I like to show how Worcester has changed over the years, is I've penned in different colours the settlement changes of Worcester, and they are accurate to both archaeological records and also from old maps. And also just looking at the environment, like I said, where are the watercourses, where are the hills, where is the high ground, the important things that people needed years ago. So when we look at the history of Worcester, we predominantly settled on the highest point next to a water source, and that is that site there. That's the site where Worcester Cathedral and the King's School is. So if you stand anywhere within the cathedral precinct, as I always say, you are located in the oldest part of Worcester. And we know, as I have said in previous videos, that that is Worcester around about 700 to 750 BC. And that is the nucleus really where Worcester developed from. And what I've done is marked it in red. We know there was a Bronze Age and Iron Age settlement on that spot, and then later on there was some form of Roman fortification on there. We're not saying there was a fort there, but there would have been some form of defensive feature on that site. And like I said, we know it's there because we have archaeology or archaeological evidence to back it up. And if we're looking at maps and streets, I always say, if you think of 7th Street, which is to the south, which is located where my finger is at the moment, that's really the southern boundary of early Worcester. And we're talking anything from Bronze Age Worcester up to the Roman period as such. And it ends pretty much where the street is of Fish Street. So it gives you an idea of the brackets that Worcester sits under really. So 7th Street to Fish Street. And we see the evidence, not just in archaeological terms, but you also see bumps on the ground. If you're ever by the fire station in Deansway, there is a dip there. That's going over that northern boundary. Fish Street is that northern bit. So I've marked early Worcester in red. You will also notice I've also marked on there in green the location of the later burh or burg, and that was the Anglo-Saxon period, so after the Romans. And really, when you get King Alfred orders a refortification. I've mentioned this in previous videos. Do look up in the playlist of local history, but you will see how we've got an extension going really from the old boundary, so going from 7th Street as such, except this time it ends on the alignment of the roads of literally Broad Street, coming up to Broad Street, and St Swithin Street. So we now have a developing town or fortified defensive burh, and therefore we've got something from 7th Street up to the bracket of Broad Street and St Swithin Street, like I said. So you can still see these things. When you walk around, you can see these linear features. So you can literally see how Broad Street comes up in quite a straight line. It's following the old defensive wall of Saxon Worcester. But then we've got medieval Worcester, and I've marked that in black pen on there. And the reason I've marked it in black is because it's dominating the area even today. And you will follow that along not just City Walls Road and 7th Street, but you can also follow it if you go along the area known as the Butts. And if you walk along the riverside, if you're having a little healthy walk, which you are entitled to do, or after lockdown, everyone will be out there. If you walk along the riverside, you will actually see the city wall is still there. And obviously we actually had a castle at that point as well, and that's really on the site of the King's School to the south there, defending not just the south of the settlement but also the bend of the river. So that's medieval Worcester. And like I said, if you wander along City Walls Road in the riverside, you will actually see evidence. It's still there. So I always say, look at maps, look at the names of areas, the street names for example, and that's a video in its own right, and look around. You have to look. Is there any straight lines? Are there any water courses? Are there any hills or mounds? These are places where people would be settling and living. And then the last thing I've got on there are the purple lines, and I've marked those purple lines showing where the 17th century defences were, and that was an upgrade for Worcester really. And if you look through the playlist, like I said, have a closer look at the videos I did on 17th century Worcester, or the defences or fortifications, and those purple lines really are the additions to upgrade Worcester. And interesting fact, we took part in an event in St Martin's Quarter, which is where the Asda was, and archaeologists or the archaeological department for Worcester actually found the bastion, the earthwork ditch and rampart of St Martin's Bastion, which is just there, right by St Martin's Gate, the old medieval gate. And these were all earthworks. And famously, if you go onto the top of Fort Royal, you will also notice the way they've laid the flower beds out. It shows the fort. And if you go up there, even where there isn't a path, you can physically see the fort. You just have to use your eyes, look for the lumps and bumps on the land. Landscape archaeology, fascinating stuff really. And then obviously you will see Worcester is expanded after that. So I would say have a close look around you, have a look at old maps, and it's surprising all the things that they tell you. It's almost like the symbols and the pictures and just the lumps and bumps of the landscape are crying out for you to learn more about an area. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. And once again, subscribe. Make sure you send us your requests. We've had quite a few so far, and we'll try and roll them out as we go. What you have to remember is, in theory, we've got 6 weeks of this, so one video every single day to keep you entertained. On that note, stay safe, stay in, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.